Hello, everybody. Welcome along to our Careers Month event in partnership with MVF, Gousto and AO.com. It's one we've had in the calendar for a little while, actually, and I've been really looking forward to it. I was chatting with the panelists before the event just to say it's always one of my favourite type of events, actually. So we've got 3 lightning talks from each of today's speakers, and then we'll be having a panel discussion afterwards. So it's very much an interactive event. We're counting on all you guys out there around the world to get involved and ask some questions. So there's a Q&A feature in the webinar software. If I could ask you to put any questions in there, we've allocated time to run the panel and go through all those questions at the end. There is also a chat function. Most of the speakers won't be able to look at it while it's ongoing, but it is always nice to see people saying hello, we're here, we're enjoying ourselves, etc. So that's great. Just a couple of quick announcements from me before we get into the event. It is getting to that time of year where the Data Science Festival is nearly upon us. So Jess, Amy and Lizzie have been working incredibly hard behind the scenes. I think we've probably got in the region of 100 speakers for you across the month of November. First 3 weeks, we've got lots of online events, we've got hands-on coding workshops, we've got a quiz night, which is always very popular, we've got lunchtime sessions, keynotes in the evening, panel discussions, etc. And we have also, at the end of November, got our in-person conference. So it's going to be the first time we're back together as a community in person for nearly 2 years. And we are really, really looking forward to it. So Central London event space, full conference experience, 4 speaker rooms, swag bags, lunch, all included, all for free, because we've got some amazing sponsors again this year. So tickets for that go live next week. So keep an eye out for a newsletter coming out. It'd be great to see as many of you as possible at those events. On to today. We have got Niclas Thomas, Timothy Park and Katie Johnson with us today. The theme of the event is very much around becoming a data leader, you know, moving from being an individual contributor into management roles. All 3 have got lots of experience in this area, and they're going to start off by covering lightning talks in that area, and then they'll be sticking around for the panel afterwards. So first speaker today is Katie. So Katie, I will ask you, please, if you will, come and join me on the stage. That probably sounded weird, didn't it? So yeah, come and join me on the stage, Katie, if you can.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I am fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. I've been definitely looking forward to this one. So Katie is taking a slightly different approach with her lightning talk today. So Katie's been in a senior IC, senior individual contributor. She's moved into management, lots of experience in the area, and she's going to be talking to us about why that might not be for everyone, and give us some like really practical insights of what that move might look like. So if you're happy, Katie, I'll maybe get you to share your screen. And then I will get out the way and leave you to it. So hope you enjoy your talk, Katie. I'll jump back in at the end. Then we'll go to Nick, and then we'll go to Tim. And at the very end of the event, we'll have all 3 back for questions. So last shout out for the Q&A feature. If you have got a question, please put it in there. So over to you, Katie. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Great. So hey, everyone. My name is Katie Johnson, and I'm currently the head of data and analytics at a company called MVF. So today I'm going to be talking to you about why management isn't necessarily for everyone. You're probably thinking it's pretty strange to start an event on how to move into management with a talk on why that might not always be such a great idea. And I agree with you. It definitely feels weird to me, but I don't think that it should. Taking the step into management in data, but also in most domains, is only ever celebrated. You're becoming more senior, more successful, therefore it must be a good thing. Before I became a manager, I never heard anyone speak about the downsides of moving into management, what I'd miss, what I'd be giving up. And I definitely hadn't heard anyone making the move in reverse, a manager choosing to go back to being an IC. But that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I currently lead the analytics function at my company and report into the CTO. I thought this was my dream job, but after a year and a half, I'm leaving to be a senior data scientist elsewhere. Today, I want to share a balanced account of what it's like to be a manager and why you shouldn't just assume it's the right path for you without first asking yourself some challenging questions. Now, before I get into it, I just want to make a few things clear. First, I'm not going to spend this talk telling you how bad being a manager is. I just want to encourage you to think deeply on whether management is truly the right path for you. Second, this event was described as covering the topic of moving from individual contributor to manager. However, I think we should edit that slightly to include and back again, because why does it have to be one directional? There's absolutely no reason you can't become a manager and then go back to being an IC. I myself would definitely not rule out becoming a people manager again in a future role. So I want to start off just by telling you a bit about me and my journey into management. I studied economics, and it was here that I first became interested in statistics, and that's ultimately what led me to pursue a career in data science. For the next few years, I did various IC roles in data analysis and really focused on progressing technically. Then, about 4 years ago, I was having a development discussion with the director of my team, and he asked me one of those questions that I really hate. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Without even really thinking about it, I answered that I wanted to manage a team because that's the path, right? You're a great IC and you love doing what you do, but you want to have more impact and more autonomy, so you become a manager. It felt obvious. Not long after this, I hired my first analyst, and not long afterwards, I hired another. Then, over the next few years, I moved companies a couple of times, each time planning how I could amass a bigger team. And then I landed my current role. It was the type of role that I had wanted for so long, and it seemed like all my strategic job moves to gain more management experience had finally paid off. I felt great. And at first, it really was great. There have been so many things that I have loved about management. My favourite was that I finally got to set out the data strategy. If I thought something could be improved, I no longer had to get my manager to buy into my idea. It was my team, so I could just implement it. I immediately felt like I could have way more impact than when I was an IC. For the first time in ages, I also felt like I was learning something new every day. There were so many new challenges, and it was great to feel like I had so much to learn ahead of me. Finally, I love getting to spend time developing others. It felt good to be able to help analysts who were maybe a few years behind me become better at their roles and to pass on advice and wisdom that I had amassed along the way. However, I soon found there were a lot of things that were really hard that I hadn't expected. The biggest for me was the sheer amount of time that I had to spend communicating. Of course, when you're an IC, you have to spend time speaking to your team and your stakeholders, but that is nothing compared to heading up and representing a big team. I am an excellent rejecter of meetings that I don't deem relevant, but as a senior data person in this company, I would still inevitably spend hours of my day in meetings. Second, although I had lots to learn, I wasn't always learning things that I was interested in. For example, I had to spend a lot of time learning how to renegotiate contract renewals with our tool providers. Now, maybe some people think that's interesting, but to me, it felt particularly dull compared to the mostly interesting technical work I've been doing in my previous roles. Finally, whilst I love the developing and coaching elements of my roles, management inevitably brings a lot of unforeseen challenges your way. Having a big team means ups and downs, from surprise resignations to performance issues, and you'll get varying degrees of support depending on your company's HR or people team. I was lucky to have great support with any issues I faced, but I often still came away feeling exhausted because I deeply cared about the people that I manage. And then I quit. In the end, it wasn't really any of these factors that caused me to quit. I'm a rigidly logical person, but I didn't make this decision from an intricate pros and cons list. I decided to leave because I had lost that feeling that I usually had when I woke up each day. Excitement. Excitement to start my work, excitement for what I was going to find out from the data, excitement to share that with the business that I worked in. Upon looking for a new role, I changed my strategy. In seeking a senior management position, I had become incredibly strategic, but also narrow-minded in terms of the roles that I would even consider. This time, it felt freeing to choose roles where I read the description and felt genuine passion and curiosity at companies whose missions really resonated with me. Quitting wasn't an easy decision. Part of it was because I thought I'd worked really hard to get here. Was it all a waste? But another reason was that despite inwardly not enjoying my role, I kept getting told what a great job I was doing and how I was such a great people manager. However, I'd come to terms with the fact that just because you're good at something and you've worked really hard to get it, doesn't mean that you enjoy it. After leaving a job I thought I desperately wanted, unsurprisingly, I spent quite some time reflecting on what went wrong. How did this happen? And I soon realized that actually it wasn't really that surprising at all. When I started thinking about who I am, what work I love, what gets me excited to start each day, I realized that it made sense. I'm a really introverted person. I like coding, problem solving, thinking on my own. On the flip side, the type of work that I can just about tolerate has always been a lot of speaking, admin type tasks, working in the grey. Considering what I loved and didn't love about my previous roles, it was pretty obvious to me that actually being a manager was never what I truly wanted in the first place. What I really wanted was to have more impact, to be increasingly autonomous over the work that I was doing. Management just seemed like the most obvious way to get that, the default path. After having this realization, I came up with a few questions I wish I had asked myself before taking this path into management, which is what I want to share with you today. They really aren't very complicated, but I think too rarely do we actually challenge the preconceived ideas we have of what we want. So the first question is, what work do you love doing? Once I listed out the types of tasks that woke me up excited each day, compared to ones that required me to have that extra cup of coffee just to get through them, it was pretty obvious what type of role was best for me. Before moving into management, I think everyone should do this exercise to avoid falling into the trap of just following the well-trodden path without critically evaluating it. The second question, would you really want your manager's job? I can clearly remember in one of my IC roles, I would look at my manager rushing about, never having a moment to sit down and solve a problem on his own, constantly having conflicting priorities dumped his way. And I thought to myself, wow, that looks awful, and I never want to have to do that. And yet just 2 years later, I end up doing that very job. Before moving into management, I urge you to try and understand more about the day-to-day responsibilities in the role above yours and how that aligns or doesn't align to the type of work you actually enjoy. Final question, have you truly considered alternative paths? Some of you are probably listening to this and you already have a really strong feeling that you want to lead a team, and that's great. But have you actually considered it against other paths? We all know that a lot of companies now offer specialist development paths instead of management ones, but often these are still the secondary pathway. You can do this if you don't want to be a manager. But by the very nature of what being a manager entails, there are going to be fewer management roles than specialist roles, and hence following the specialist path actually shouldn't be viewed as the secondary route at all. Comparing management routes to, say, becoming a technical specialist in your area, or even moving into a related field, should be considered seriously before deciding management is the one for you. So, in summary, before becoming a manager, I think everyone should ask themselves these 3 questions. What type of work do you love doing? Would you actually want your manager's job? And have you considered alternative paths? So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Katie. That was fantastic to listen to, and actually a perfect way to kick off the event. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing what sort of questions we get coming at the end. So thank you very much so far, and I will see you after the other 2 speakers. I am now going to ask Nick to join. Oh, that was seamless, Nick. Nick is a true professional in every sense of the word. So Nick is going to be talking to us about cross-functional delivery and how to get the best out of data teams. I should probably mention Nick is the head of data science at Gousto, who we all, I'm sure know very well. So if you're happy, Nick, I'll maybe get you to share your screen and then we'll go from there. I have seen that there have been a couple of questions come in, which is great. I will just plug the Q&A one more time. So please do keep the questions coming and we'll be back for the panel at the end. But for now, Nick, I'll get out your way and I'll see you soon.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone, for having me. And hello to you all. So I'm Nick. I am the head of data science at Gousto. And I'll be talking about functional management in a cross-functional world, which is the way we work at Gousto across the tech, at least. But before I just come on to that topic, just to give a brief overview for those of you that aren't familiar with Gousto. So we are a meal kit retailer, which means that we put loads of different recipes in front of customers every week, and then we ask them to choose which recipes they would like. And then it's our responsibility then to source the raw ingredients, put them in a box in our factories, and then ship that box to the customer's front door week after week. We pride ourselves on variety and choice, so we currently have 60 recipes on the menu every week, and that changes week to week. And as well as that, then we also have a big focus on quality, so high quality ingredients that have a long shelf life and arrive to the customer's front door in really good condition. And also simplicity then, so how easy is it for a customer to use whether our app or they're ordering on our website, how easily can they order week after week then to make their recipe choices. And as well as being a meal kit retailer, we are also a data company that loves food. And just to highlight the investment, I suppose, in data at Gousto over the past couple of years, but certainly in the past year. So I joined in July 2020, and we were at 20 colleagues in data as a whole then. At the same point this year, we got to 40, and we're now at 50 then a couple of months after that. So in not long over a year, we have more than doubled in size, which obviously is quite significant growth. And the same is true in data science. And in my team, I think 6 data scientists when I joined. We're now at 16. We've got several new join us next month, and several more new roles then live towards the end of the year and the start of next year. So yeah, we are hiring, and we would welcome any applications for anyone that is interested. But along that theme of hypergrowth, I think it's really important to consider how we deliver our work and how you deliver your work when you're going through that kind of scaling as a company. So as I mentioned, we at Gousto use cross-functional squad-based working, which means that our data scientists, our analysts, our software engineers are all embedded in one squad, along with a product manager to guide the direction of the work that they're doing. And they all then focus on one specific business domain, relatively narrow business domain then. So for example, one squad will look at forecasting, another will look at retention, and so on. And so this makes it really easy to add new business domains as and when we need to, and deciding on what products we want to do with it, part of what we do. But it does bring about quite a few functional challenges in terms of the functional management. So by that, I mean, as a head of data science, the head of analytics, how do you manage your team when they are distributed and federated, fully embedded within these squads then? So you're basically having less face-to-face time with them. So I just wanted to share 4 challenges that we have gone through and hopefully solved, and I think we've tackled well over the past year or so. So just with that in mind, the first challenge that we went through is, I think it's quite common across all teams that become decentralized and embedded, is that of losing the community, if you like. So rather than being co-located, sitting in the same place day after day, potentially with a daily stand-up there where you're all sharing your experience on a day-to-day basis, it can be quite a significant change for the data scientists then to be working closely with the other data scientists in their squad, but then a lot less closely with the rest of the team. And there are loads of things that you can do to overcome this, ranging from the very, very simplistic of just making sure you have those communication channels open. So having a Slack channel dedicated for the data science team. Obviously very easy to arrange in hackathons, for example, and making sure that the teams spend more time collaborating together. Obviously slightly more time investment in the case of a hackathon, but I think the weekly team meetings then become absolutely crucial to the sense of community across the business then, and making sure that all the data scientists there attending those weekly team meetings, but also having the right things to talk about there. So the way we work it is just to have every squad, a different squad every week then, to present what work they have been doing and what they plan to do in the future, to really get the feedback from the rest of the data science team then, which has 2 benefits. On the one hand, the actual product development is better because it has more input from other data scientists, but also it helps everyone to I suppose, to learn and grow and develop their skills, because they're seeing how other data scientists might solve problems in different areas to the ones they're working with. So I think that team meeting then becomes really important then once you do move to a cross-functional embedded way of working. The second challenge on a related note is we call it 10% time, so tech 10% time, basically one Friday every 2 weeks where we dedicate to our own learning and development. And that's true across all of Gousto Tech, not just data science. I think the cross-functional embedded ways of working work really well in terms of the product delivery and delivering products really efficiently. But I think in general, I think it's less focused on the learning and development. So I think the colleagues that you work with in every squad then will probably be less focused on your learning and development, more just about the delivery of the product in the domain that you're focused on. So for example, in times of say a business critical event, for example, that has to be fixed by a particular squad in their area, then I think the squad will be more focused on fixing those and focusing on delivery rather than separating the development time. So I think it's really important as a functional head of then to make sure, I suppose, protecting your team in one sense, but also it's about making the right decision for the business as well as for your team and for your colleagues as well. And so really be in a position to be able to say then times when they do need to protect their time for learning and development, if you don't think the issue is so severe that it needs fixing on that same day. And likewise then doing the best for the business and balancing that with your team's needs then as well, I think becomes really important then. The third challenge, I suppose, is a bit of a truism in many ways, and obviously as a head of my function, I want to be close to all the data products that my team are building, but it definitely becomes a lot harder to do when you are working in a cross-functional model. In a centralized traditional model, you might be having, all your team will be sitting near you, or virtually, co-located, and having regular meetings, probably on a daily basis. Perhaps when I've worked in central teams before, centralized data science teams, you'll have maybe a morning stand-up every day where you're spending time with your team, and it's very easy to stay on top of the work that all the rest of your team are doing then, and so you're able to contribute your own ideas as well. This is obviously a lot harder when you've got your team distributed across multiple different squads, because they will all likely be having their morning stand-up, but within their own squad and typically at the same time. So it's obviously physically impossible to attend them all then. And so I think this is where communication channels are really important then to make sure that they're really strong when you are working cross-functionally like this. And I think on the one hand, I think it's really important that I have weekly one-to-ones an hour with everyone, every senior data scientist in each of those different squads then to make sure I'm staying up to date, not only in their development as line manager, but also up to date with the work that is happening in every squad then as a functional head of. And I think the second point then is I think documentation becomes even more important, and not really code documentation, but what I call is work and outcome documentation. So we use Confluence and wiki pages on that to document all of the work that we have done, and largely just on a relatively high level output base. So what are the results that have happened from this particular piece of work I've done, for example? And that really helps me to stay on top, and the functional heads to stay on top of the work that my team is doing. But also I think as long as it's written in the right way and we have principles in place to do that, to make sure it's written at high level, relatively non-technical communication, then it means we can share with the wider business then, and it serves two purposes then as well. So I think that's really valuable. And then just the final challenge, if you like, and solution to that is the management structure itself. So I think there are three core principles then when working across embedded in squads and working cross-functionally. The first, I think, is it's still important to maintain reporting lines that are specific to functions. So don't be tempted to have a data scientist report into a lead engineer, for example. I think it's really important for data scientists to report into data scientists, software engineers to report into software engineers, to really benefit from the extra experience that your line manager has then. The second principle that I've always worked by is whenever we have a new squad that we want to spin up, focusing on a new business domain, then the senior data scientist should always be the first hire. That means that you have someone who has the necessary experience to build a roadmap and work with the product manager to do that, but also have the technical expertise to actually deliver that. But it also means then you have your ready-made line manager in place, because the second point then, as you do grow that squad and have more junior data scientists joining, then you have that management structure in place where those data scientists can report to the senior data scientist within the same squad, which I think is really important from the perspective of the line manager, then the senior data scientist observing on a day-to-day basis what their direct report is doing, how well they're progressing, what their achievements are, as well as what their development areas might be as well then. So I think it's really important to have that in place to make sure that you can scale effectively then when your team is distributed across multiple squads. In the interest of time, I will leave it there. I would just say that cross-functional working works, in my opinion. We use it across all of Gousto Tech, and with good reason. as well as data scientists, engineers, product, all love working together and learning from each other. It means that the data scientists get closer to the business and working with closer with product managers and the rest of our stakeholders, as well as just being more effective for product delivery, in my opinion. So I think that's something that definitely does work for a team. But that's not to say that there aren't any functional challenges from what I've mentioned then about it's important to just maintain that sense of community, to protect the team's learning and development time. And to make sure you stay close to all products, as well as having a scalable management structure in place. So thank you very much for listening. I'll hand back to you, Dave.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. Again, the questions are flying in. So I think we're up to 6 there on the back end, which is great to see. And I think that sort of real world piece that you're bringing in there is definitely going to lead to a lot of questions. So I look forward to hearing from you at the end. We will jump on to Tim now. So Tim Park is a senior data scientist at AO.com. He's going to be talking to us today about his move into leadership roles and what he had to think about in making that move in terms of potentially letting go and also managing the team. So if you're just about ready to go, Tim, I'll maybe get you to share your screen.
Get it up.
That is looking good.
It's just going to load. There we go.
There we go. It's never
right,
in doubt.
Everyone can see that.
I will leave you to it, Tim. I'll see you for the panel at the end. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So firstly, a slight apology that I've been hit with a bit of a cold, so my voice isn't quite what it was, but I think I can power through. So the purpose of this talk is I want to give everybody a bit of introduction to who I am and a bit of context for what my career path has been so far, and also a little bit about what my kind of motivations are, what I'm enjoying about my job, and why I've made some of the career decisions I have. So as a quick overview, this is the kind of simplified timeline of how I got to where I am now. So I came from a statistics background, so I did a PhD at Lancaster University, which was partly funded by Unilever. So that kind of gave me a taste of what life was like working in industry as opposed to academia. And it was something that really appealed to me. So when I finished at university, I took a job at Shell as part of their statistics team. That was quite an interesting team to join because at that time, there were about 20 people in the team, and it was a very, very flat structure. So we had our team lead, and then everybody else was an IC. So while, of course, the more senior, more experienced members kind of naturally gave you a little bit of the kind of mentoring and the help, officially there were no kind of sub-teams or line managers like that. As companies often do, they had a restructuring. So in 2018, that changed. So the personnel in the team were about the same, but the structure was completely different. So we had a manager, and then I think about 5 or 6 sub-team leads. I don't remember if I actually put my hand up for one of those positions, but I was offered one. And so, yeah, I very quickly switched from being an IC, being hands-on with projects, to being a team lead. Weirdly enough, I was a team lead initially with no team. I had to hire one myself, but I was kind of made the technical lead in a couple of big projects. So it was a similar kind of experience there anyway. It was definitely a shift from, being the one doing the work to suddenly being pulled into a lot of meetings. My calendar kind of exploded, and it was all very different for me. So in 2020, for personal reasons, I decided to move on from Shell. And this was a time where, because I was looking for a new job anyway, I really could have chosen lots of different types of role, the new company. But I was attracted to the role at AO, which was also a team lead position, again, with no team lead. This was because they were establishing their data science function. So I was hired as a senior data scientist with the intention to grow a team. and I now am in a position where I have now 3 people in my team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how did that all feel. So around the same time as I became a line manager, I also became a father for the same time. And as people, we often look for patterns and similarities and parallels. So I kind of naturally did in these 2 worlds. And it's a picture of my son enjoying a computer game. For any of you in the know, this is around one of his favorite TV characters, Waffle the Wonder Dog. And he really enjoys playing this game, but he's absolutely terrible at it. He forgets which buttons he's supposed to be pushing. He gets the dog kind of trapped in corners. He goes past the items he's meant to be collecting. Yeah, he's just no good. I mean, he is 3, so that's probably the reason. And for me, watching him play this game, I get this kind of overwhelming urge to just sort of take over and, oh, no, just go this way, or you press this button and everything. Because I know that if I was doing it, we'd get done with this level very, very quickly. So you may be able to see where I'm going with this. There's that same kind of reaction when a really good piece of project work comes along, and it's very interesting. It's something that I would really like to do, and it's something that I know exactly how I would start it, and I know that I can do a really good job on it, but I can't because I don't have the time, and that's not supposed to be my role anymore. I have to hand it over to somebody else. So, feeling this happen, and as I said, having my calendar explode and not having the time for things that I wanted to do, it made me reflect a lot. And, I asked myself a serious question, well, do I want this? Is this something that I want? And for me, the answer kind of turned out to be yes, because there were a lot of positives that I saw. So I'm somebody who likes to be involved in lots of different things. I have quite sort of varied interests, and being the team lead for a team, you get to hear about lots and lots of different things, and you get kind of pulled into discussions about lots of different projects, either ones that your team are working on, or maybe potential ones, or ones that other teams have done. And that was very appealing to me. You also get pulled into kind of different sorts of meetings as well. So kind of cross-functional meetings of team leads, where you get to see, well, where does my world fit in with other people's? And that was very interesting to me as well. The other part of it is, so my role at the moment, it is still technical, because while I'm not doing nearly as much coding as I used to, I still have technical discussions with my team. They tell me about what they've been doing. We get into the detail. I look through their code. I look through their results. We discuss whether, what does this actually mean? Are there better ways to do it? And those discussions I find are really interesting. And again, you get a lot of variety of those because, I'm switching between these kind of technical discussions on a couple of different projects. And yeah, really what I find is that, myself as a team lead, being enabled by the people in my team, means that I can achieve a lot more than I could, just because, having at the moment 3 people doing stuff, they can do a lot more stuff than I ever could on my own. So the other part of it as well, which I kind of had to realize about myself. So 2 slides ago, hopefully you were paying attention, I kind of insinuated that the data scientists that I'm hiring are just like toddlers. That's a little bit patronizing. And it is one thing which, I have to remind myself a bit as well, that look, I hired these people and I was lucky enough to, be the decision maker in whether they were hired or not, because they're very smart, they're very capable, and they've shown previously that they can perform and deliver. They also have, lots of different experiences and lots of different kind of areas of expertise. And this again, for me, it can be a bit of a bruise at first that, this junior person is more of an expert on something than me, or, they'll disagree with something that I've said and say, well, no, isn't this way better? And well, they're right. But yeah, I found that it is also something that I enjoy, because again, it means that we can have this kind of back and forth discussion, and yeah, their kind of combined knowledge with hopefully mine as well, so I have been doing it for a while. It does mean that there's a lot more things that we can do, and ultimately the work that we're producing is a better quality for that. So yeah, in short, they're not quite the same as toddlers. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, another insightful talk, and you can tell with the questions coming in that people have been listening along very intently as we've been going through. So I'll actually ask Nick and Katie to turn their cameras back on, and we will jump into the panel if that's okay. So awesome. In terms of the Q&A, I think I mentioned to you guys beforehand, you can read along in parallel on the back end just to see the questions that are upcoming. I have a few of my own that I've scribbled down as I've been going. And we'll go from there. But I think what we'll do, we'll actually run through the questions in a rough order as they've come in. Actually, that actually makes quite a bit of sense. The first question there at the top of the list is from Gareth Jones. It's a question that he directed specifically to Katie. So we'll start with you, Katie, but I will also come to Nick and Tim as well, just to see what it's like at Gousto and also at AO as well. So Gareth's question is to Katie: do you still work on your own technical projects as a manager? And if so, how do you balance that effectively with your management responsibilities?
Yeah, so when I was a manager of like a couple of people, it was quite easy to balance it because they didn't really take up that much time. But in my current role, when I'm managing like 8+ people, it obviously became a lot harder to try and like carve time out for myself. And at the start, when I first joined, it was like impossible, basically. But after probably 6 months of being in the role, I started designating days in my calendar that were like no meeting days. So I find it really hard, as I'm sure everyone does, to like jump in and out, like, oh, I've got an hour here, I'll try and get my head into something. That just doesn't work for me. So I would like set out specific days where I'd do all my kind of meetings on one day and I'd be really tired, but then the next day I'd have no meetings, so I could like get my head into a project that was more technical, so like writing code and actually working on something. And I honestly found that really beneficial, not just because I really enjoy it, but because it like keeps you being like supple at having those conversations with the people you manage about technical things and like methods. So yeah, I would recommend what I did, obviously, but like, yeah, putting aside like set days that you're going to do that on regularly. I found that was the only way I could really manage it, rather than chopping in and out of things like round meetings.
Yeah, I feel like we could have a whole separate webinar on how to manage calendars, couldn't we? I think everyone needs some input on that one. So I'll come to you, Nick. I'm guessing in your role, it isn't possible to have hands-on time in your role. You've got such a big team now. What does it look like for you at Gousto?
Yeah, I think generally you're probably right. There's only a couple of examples I can think of that I've actually, certainly not my own technical projects. There's a few technical elements of that. So for example, establishing cookie cutter templates for all of our repos then to make sure they're all built in the same way. So I wouldn't own my own technical projects, but I do think it's important to have that time of pairing with the rest of the team, which I try and do. And I think that serves two purposes. Obviously, on the one hand, it's great for me to stay close. And one of the challenges I mentioned, staying close to the products that we build in the team. And it's a really good way of seeing the code base as well and pairing with the team now and again to be able to do that and hopefully contribute some of my own ideas as well. But at the same time, I think it also does. I always think it's important as a data science leader to establish technical credibility as well. And I think the pairing time, assuming I do it in the right way, helps to establish that. Not saying I necessarily do, but I think it does then help to the team to relate to you and actually respect your opinions a bit more than a hands-off manager who might not have the technical skills. So I think that's really important as well.
That's a good point to make, Nick. Definitely. And yourself, Tim, do you still get an element of hands-on in your role, and what does it look like?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting for me because I've been in AO for just over a year now. And as I said, to start with, I was a team lead, but I didn't have a team. So that basically be an IC. So I was doing a lot of hands-on technical work again because I was the only data scientist. Now, yeah, I think Katie made a good point. It's easier when you have a small team because there's just less management stuff to be doing. So with 3 in my team now, I probably don't do very much technical work, really. Maybe it depends what you count as technical work. Certainly in terms of hands-on writing code and analyzing data, I don't do that much. I think it's probably depends. It's one thing which, when you're moving into this kind of role, you have to ask yourself, well, what are the priorities? For me, from previous experiences, that probably wasn't really my priority. I do like it. I did it for many years and enjoyed it. The bit that I really wanted to hang on to is having those sort of technical discussions around, the sort of hands-on work other people have done. So it's still very technical because we do talk in the details and we do look at code and we do look at the output people are making, but it's not necessarily what you call hands-on. So I think that's one thing I've found for myself, and also looking at other people who've made the transition, is you have to make that call of, okay, what is really important to me, and if there are things that if you want to be a manager who still writes a lot of code, for example, then yeah, you have to act and do something to protect that time, is what I found.
So it sounds like that tipping point where you become hands off is actually quite quick in terms of when, team size. It doesn't sound like it needs to be a particularly big team where you quite quickly start to lose that hands-on time. So I think, yeah, completely take all of your points there. It definitely depends on obviously your motivations. The next question there from Rafa. It's good to see you, Rafa, actually. Long-term attendee and speaker actually at the Data Science Festival. So good to know you're online. Rafa's talking about the impact as an individual contributor. So we'll take Rafa's question. The next couple underneath actually as well kind of lead all together into the same sort of area. So we'll cover these all off at once. But Rafa's asking, do you think that the impact is restricted for senior individual contributors? She's asking, why do managers get more decision-making power when sometimes senior individual contributors might actually be better placed to make those decisions about project feasibility and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that? And I guess in terms of your organizations, in terms of the levels of a senior IC, how much input do they have? How do you make sure that they have a voice to impact in the decisions and kind of set strategy as well? So I'd be keen to get your take on the role of senior individual contributors in your organization, if possible. I'll maybe go in reverse order this time, if that's okay. Maybe start with you, Tim, and we'll come to you at the end, Katie, with Nick sandwiched in the middle there.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it comes down to the kind of culture. It's the way it's always been, that your seniority is defined by how many people report to you, and so managers are the ones who are kind of looked on as the most senior. I think really there has to be a thought of, well, why are we giving this decision-making power to this person? There are certain reasons why managers should be given more decision-making power, because they are in charge of a larger number of people, that gives them some sort of impact. But if you're wanting somebody to make a decision based on technical knowledge, well, maybe your senior ICs are the ones you should be listening to. What I should say is, so my previous role in Shell, I think they're doing a very good job at this. So sort of team lead meetings would generally also include the senior ICs as just a matter of course. They would be involved in a lot of these same discussions, and I think that is quite a healthy place to be. AO, we're a very interesting time because we're really building up a lot of these things. I don't think we really have the concept of a senior IC yet, but it's definitely something which particularly for me, thinking about data science, that we need to have that route. And yeah.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Tim. I'll come to you, Nick, if you don't mind now. In terms of how do the senior ICs have a voice at Gousto to get stuff impacted?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Tim said. I think that so we do have both principals and leads as well. So the leads are our managerial roles and principals are our individual contributor roles. And I think it really comes down to what the decision is ultimately of who has what say. And obviously, you know, both experience opinions, I think, always should matter. But in terms of the division of who should attend what meetings so we avoid meeting overload, generally, I think the how in terms of how we're going about delivering our work and what are the things like the operating model, the delivery mechanism, how we work at a broad level, I think is best done by the managerial type roles. Because and ultimately, that's I think if the hiring is in the right place, I think, and you're getting principals and individual contributors who have that strong technical skill set, then you want to free their time up to focus on the problems that really matter at a technical level. So if it's the how we work, then I think it's best on the managerial side. But if it's how we actually build a solution, what technique should we use to do this, for example, then I think that and timelines as well, I think that sits with the IC.
Makes a lot of sense, definitely. And I'll come to you now, Katie, please.
Yes, I've got two thoughts. I guess the first one, I think it's like less about seniority and more about being that IC that people really trust and come to. You know, in various businesses I've worked in, it really is regardless of level. There'll be someone who's like, everyone goes to, like, they know everything, they're really valuable, they always have like really good insight. I think as an IC, like your goal is to become that person. So like regardless of being whatever level, I think being an IC who everyone knows that you have good ideas and that people trust what you say, I think that's like the goal. And I think second of all as well, thinking about impact, and I'm sure other people, I often get really focused on kind of the end decision. And I think in that instance, people further up the hierarchy do have more impact because they do get the final say. But actually impact can be just changing people's mind about how they're thinking about a problem or bringing stuff to the table no one had even thought of before. So I think people shouldn't get hung up too much on like, well, the final decision didn't go the way I said it should. But actually you probably have had quite a lot of impact if people changed what they thought or like learned something new along that way. So yeah, I think just like not getting too hung up on like, oh, the final thing didn't go my way, so I literally had no purpose in this. Like, I don't think that is true in most instances.
Yeah, you've shaped it in some way. Definitely. And that leads us on to the question there from Charlotte McLean. And I think traditionally it always has been, you know, as you step up through the levels and you move into management, the package, the salary, you know, goes with it. I think what we're seeing at Data Idols out there is actually things are changing a bit. Actually, you know, senior IC packages are at manager level for a lot of clients now, but keen to get the panel's take on that. You know, how do you think senior ICs, you know, should be paid? Should that be at the same sort of level as a manager, or do you think there still is that differentiation? I'll maybe see if anyone's got an opinion first, rather than me dictate the order. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I can jump in, Dave. So I think career frameworks are the first thing I would say are really important for this, because I think it helps to establish expectations on managerial and IC pathways, and it gives a really firm framework then to be able to assess what you'd expect for the same salary from an IC role as you would from, you know, the managerial role. So I think that's the first thing that I would say is important. But ultimately, I do think that ultimately it probably comes down to what Tim said before. I think on culture of the business in practice, I think of a data-driven business, I think who puts data at the heart of what they do will ultimately appreciate the needs for the technical expertise as much as managerial expertise, and rightly so. That's not to say it's the same for every company. I think yeah, if there's a lower technical bar needed in some, just because the work is less complex, for example, I think potentially it might actually be the right thing to do to pay the technical experience less, just because you need less technical experience and the problems might be less complex to solve. So I think it all really depends on the company and both the culture and the problems you're trying to solve there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds good. Katie or Tim, anything to add on that point?
I would agree. I think when I've, like, in the most recent time period, been looking for a new role, I've been pleasantly surprised at how high some of the IC salaries can be, particularly as you've like worked longer and have more experience. So yeah, I had a preconceived idea that, oh, in order to earn a certain amount of money, I'd have to become a manager. But I don't know if it's changed. I feel like it has changed. I think it's no longer true in quite a few companies, like transition period.
Yeah, I definitely, we're seeing the same thing, so I would definitely agree. Anything to add from you, Tim, on that one?
Yeah, I think the guys covered it pretty well. I mean, one thing which I've definitely seen as being very important is within a company you have to give people that opportunity to move up in different ways. And ultimately, if you're not giving people the opportunity to move up as an IC, and that includes both in terms of responsibility, in terms of the technical stuff, and it has to also include the remuneration, then ultimately you'll lose some people. And it does depend on, for the particular company, do you value somebody who doesn't want to manage a team but has a huge amount of expertise? And I think generally in the marketplace, the answer is coming more and more to yes, which is really a good thing.
Yeah, it's good to see. That definitely is good to see. Next couple of questions. The next one from Simon. I love Simon's question. We'll come to Simon's perhaps towards the end if we've got any time. But Simon's specifically asking Nick any tips for interviewing at Gousto. So Simon, we will come back to that. Equally, perhaps if you wanted to contact Nick directly on LinkedIn, I'm sure he'd be happy to chat and hear from anyone here. But top marks from Simon there. I'm going to jump down to the question from Gareth Jones. Gareth is talking about the squad structure. I think, as Nick's mentioned, it is becoming more and more common. We'll come to you first, Nick, but equally Katie and Tim, like, jump in at any time. The product piece, I'm sure, is very relevant in your organizations as well. But the question there from Gareth is, how critical is it having a product manager to lead each squad? So in terms of that product piece, Nick, what does that look like at Gousto, and how do they help impact projects?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good question, and for me, it's absolutely critical. It's so important to have those in place for many reasons. I think I said you probably don't realize the impact a good product manager has until you realize, or it's in some ways like the referee. You only notice the bad ones, but the good ones will make sure everything works without really realizing they're there almost. And so I think it is crucial. Again, the conversations around the meeting workload, for example, I think freeing that time up of getting stakeholders in the right place, understanding what the requirements are, it's really important from that perspective. But also at Gousto, then we do have a quite a strict quarterly OKR planning process. So objectives and key results are OKRs then that we plan at the start of every quarter. And the product managers really will lead that then to understand exactly what does the business want us to work on this quarter, and making sure then that we deliver it then. And I think without having them in place to do that, I think there's always that danger of you diverge from what the business actually wants, or you're just spending so many time in meetings and planning that it's very difficult to actually have the time to do. So yeah, I can't recommend it high enough. I think having the product managers in place, and a good product manager of that, I think makes a huge difference. The
product manager union are very much backing Nick. Nick's gone up in their esteem, so that's all good. I'll be interested actually in terms of how that works, Katie and Tim, in your organizations. I know some companies go for the squad structure. There's obviously lots of other structures out there to get the best out of the teams. How do your teams work with engineering, work with the product team, work with the different stakeholders at MVF and also at AO? So I'll maybe come to you first, Katie.
Yeah, I think that at the moment it isn't completely across the business set up in that way, but that is how I've worked in other organizations. And I think there's a lot of interest and desire to transition to working in that way, because I think that where experiments have been done to work in that way, it's worked really well. So yeah, I think probably like a lot of other businesses, they see this working other places, and there's a real hunger and interest to try and get some of the benefits of that. But I would agree with Niclas as well. I can't imagine it working without good product managers embedded and really owning and running their areas. So yeah, I would agree.
Perfect. Anything from you, Tim?
Yeah, so the way things are set up in AO, it's very much a kind of product team structure. So you have that product manager in place. And generally, I think that is a system which works well, and it works well for AO. Where we're finding kind of challenges with that is being the data team and being relatively new in a lot of ways, particularly data science. We work across a lot of different product teams, and particularly if you get into people like data engineers or DBAs, people like that, they're needed by pretty much everybody. And so it is around how you kind of allocate those resources to different teams. I think it's kind of the old system would be if you need somebody in your team, you have a whole person. We really have to have it so that you are kind of splitting it up. And also, depending on the life cycle of the product, you'll have different sorts of needs. So that's a kind of challenge that we're facing. But yeah, I definitely have found that having people like product managers, delivery leads, scrum masters, having the right one can make a huge difference to the project. It's also kind of interesting in the context of moving from an IC to a manager, because I kind of naively thought, well, okay, I'm a manager now, so I should be doing all kinds of management, and there's lots of different sorts of management, and I was definitely not qualified to do some of them. So yeah, being able to have people who do have that kind of sort of product management, so delivery lead experience, can be very helpful as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question. I think that, again, it's actually another question from Gareth Jones in this sort of squad structure there, which again has been directed to Nick, but we'll take everyone's opinions, and then we'll fire down a little bit further down the list. We've got a few questions about how to get into management and key takeaways and stuff like that. But just in terms of this squad structure, question for Nick: do you find that work can dry up when working on only one squad? And data scientists can lose momentum. Sometimes we're waiting for data or labels, and so we switch projects whilst that's happening, but that must be difficult in this squad structure. So how do you make sure that your teams are fed all the time and actively employed?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer it first in the case of Gousto specifically, and I would say there's not been a single minute or day where work has dried up for the past.
I can imagine.
Given that we have doubled in size and the customer base is growing, it's always a case of just what can we deprioritize because there's so much to do, and extremely fast-paced environment. So in that sense, it works really well. There's never a dull moment, never a minute of downtime. But I think if there were, I think in more generally answering that question, I think it is a good point that it can happen. And I always think that the learning and development time then is really important to focus on then, because in Gousto as well, then there are times that I mentioned about the head of being key to protect the tech 10% time, but there are times where we can't do that just because of a business critical event. If something happens in our factory, for example, and we need to fix our routing algorithm, that needs to be done immediately, and the team appreciate that. And by that I mean, so sometimes where they'll lose that tech 10% time, and it's easy to give them that time back then in those moments of downtime if there is, for whatever reason, a day where we don't have as much to do, or because we have dependencies on others. I think taking that time to invest in yourself, invest in the team, and actually focus on your learning and development, I think is a good way to use that downtime in between.
Perfect. I suspect it may be similar for Tim and Katie. It sounds like the data scientists are in much demand across all the businesses. So I'm guessing there's not much downtime, but if there is, how do you prioritize and make sure people stay happy in the team?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think that it's one of the hardest things I find, both actually as an IC, but also kind of multiplied as a team lead, is managing the kind of peaks and troughs of work. And in particular, a lot of projects quite rightly don't progress past the kind of initial discovery phase. So if you've kind of set your team up that, okay, we've got 6 months of work for this, project might be cancelled after 2 weeks because you realize it's not viable anymore. So I think that the only way I really find to do this is to make sure you're quite diversified in the work that you have, both in terms of the areas of the business that you're working with, but also the kind of stage of the project as well. So, some which are kind of, we're certain that this is wanted and this will carry on for a while, some where we just don't know if this is going to go past this week. The other, I guess, kind of bit of the question around data scientists getting a bit kind of bored or stale on their work. This is something that I felt very strongly myself, because I like to work on different things, and I like to have that variety. And projects where I was on for say a year or so, it was getting a little bit boring for me at the end. So I think that's important with a team, to be able to kind of rotate people around and give people different sorts of experiences. And the risk is that you lose the knowledge there. So that's where you rely on either your team leads to kind of keep that knowledge alive. So they will stay in the same area, and they will stay aware of the project, even if the kind of ICs are different, or your kind of senior ICs, because I also have to be very aware that I have one way I like to work. Not everybody is different. Everybody's different, and so some people are happy to stay on the same project for a long time.
Yeah, some good points as well. Do you have anything to add, Katie?
No, I think they've both covered it really well.
We've covered it. I've got my eye on a question here from Ansgar. So we are going to change things up a bit here. Again, Ansgar, great to see you online, mate. In terms of Ansgar's question, it's probably very relevant. I'm imagining we've got quite a few senior data scientists, senior data engineers in the audience. And Ansgar's question is, how did you get your first leadership role? Would you recommend to try to change companies to get your first role in a leadership position, or is it better to grow into a leadership position within a company that you're in? So I'll maybe come to you first, Katie, if you don't mind on that one, and then we'll bring the guys in.
Yeah, so I think there's a different, you could divide the question up in two ways. So it's like, could you get it versus would you want to? Mm-hmm. So for example, could you get a job either in your current company or an external one managing people? Yes, I'm sure you could, but I personally have found it easier to gain people to manage in the company I'm in. And I think that's just because you build up some kind of capital and people trust you and think you're good. So they're more willing to give you people to manage. But if you move companies, you've got to kind of establish that first, and they've got to give you people to manage, but they don't know you or much about you. So I personally have found it easier to amass my first kind of people to manage, but also bigger teams when I'm somewhere already. And I think on the second one I mentioned around, instead of just could, but would you want it? What I found is when I changed into this role with a much bigger team and a new company, it's actually really hard because you don't know anything about the company or how it works. And our company is quite a confusing business model. So I had all of that to learn while trying to establish myself and also manage all these people. So I personally think it's easier to get people to manage in a company, but also it's the company and stuff. So you're not trying to do all of that at the same time. So as a first step, I would advise, if you can get people to manage in the place you are, I think that is the easier and you're more likely to succeed. Unless you just love, constant stress, then go for it. But yeah, it wouldn't be my preference.
Ansgar's a very chilled out guy. I'm guessing he's not looking for constant stress. But I'll come to you, Nick, next. What was it like for you? Did you get your first leadership position in a company that you're already in, or did you make the move in a change of company?
Yeah, mine was the former as well. So in moving from senior data scientist position and into more of a leadership role, and I think it worked out well, and I think it's for similar reasons that Katie mentioned actually as well. That it's less stressful in many ways. I think there's more opportunity to learn in that way, and I think it's always good, I think, to think of your career direction and what you want to do next. And I think as long as you've got that in mind, you can start. Any good line manager, I was lucky at the time, I did have a great line manager to learn from as well. So it gives you that opportunity to see what they do well as well, and what works for them, and actually make sure that you can imitate the best parts and then improve the parts where you think there's room that you could put your own stamp on it as well. And so I think a good line manager will not only be able to learn from just by observing them, but also having those conversations to understand, what things they regret, what decisions do they make badly, and what influencing skills do they use to solidify their leadership role in the company, and basically learn on the job then, rather than going into a new company where Katie said you've got a whole world of things to learn all at the same time.
Yeah, makes a good point actually. I'm interested just to carry that on, Nick. But learning from others, that are around you, was that kind of structured in terms of some sort of mentor plan, or was that just something that naturally happened with someone that you worked with?
It's fairly structured, yeah, on both sides as well. Again, I think a good line manager will invest in the people that report into them, and likewise, and I'm always thinking about, what is my next career step then? What do I want to do in my next role? And building skills to be able to do with that, and learning what do I need to do. So I think it should form part of those regular one-to-one conversations, in my opinion. I think that's the best way to learn then, of just observing firsthand and having those regular mentoring sessions, whether it's with your line manager or whether it's with someone else, either in the business or an external mentor. I think it's probably up for debate then, I guess. But in my case, it certainly helped to have someone going through similar things just a year or two before then to learn from.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. I guess, Tim, are you in agreement with the other two? Is it easier in a company that you know with the people around you to take that first step and then go from there?
Yeah, I would think so. So for me, I think I mentioned in my talk, I kind of got my first leadership role almost by default. I was at the point where I'd been in the team for long enough, and I was kind of getting enough experience that I was, looking for a step up. And it just so happened that about the same time, the opportunity was created, and so it was kind of natural that myself and a few others in the team at a similar level were made team leads. I think it is definitely easier, particularly for the first one, because it's not just knowing the people, it's knowing the kind of ways of working of the company, knowing the politics, knowing all of these things, because especially as you're moving into a team lead position, it's not just the technical stuff that you have to know. Python looks the same in every company pretty much, but the way the teams are put together and the way things work is very, very different. So certainly moving from Shell to AO, I was kind of surprised in some ways by how different a lot of stuff was. I mean, looking back, obviously it should be different because they're completely different companies. So it is definitely easier. I mean, one piece of advice I got from a past manager was, if you're in the position where you are thinking of leaving your current company, and this probably applies both in terms of moving to management or for any reason, first look at, well, can I make this current job or this current company what I want it to be? So is there the right opportunity to move into management in this company? But if you can't, not all companies have the best routes or the right route for you, then look around, because there are a lot of good opportunities there.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Tim. I'm going to take one more question from the list of the Q&A, and then there's a couple of questions just sort of generally that we'd prepared beforehand, just to kind of wrap things up with. In terms of that question, I'll give you a heads up. The question that I'm going to be finishing up with is basically around good resources that perhaps people can use if they're interested in moving into management in either direction. So maybe just have a little think with that one if you have any recommendations. But just in the meantime, I'm going to take the question from Brandon Charles. He's asking specifically about cross-functional teams again, but actually, we can just widen this out generally. But Brandon's question is, are cross-functional teams a good environment for an entry-level data scientist? I guess I'll flip that a little tiny bit, but in the teams that you manage, how do you nurture talent? Nick, I'll obviously get your opinion on the squad structure and what it's like, but equally for each of you, how do you make sure that you're nurturing entry-level data scientists into their first role? So I'll come to you first, Nick, because it was specifically about that sort of cross-functional team setup, and then I'll come to Katie and Tim after that.
Yes, I think the management structures, I think, are the first important point here to get those in place. That you need to make sure that you have the right people in place to perform that management, and by that I mean having the senior data scientist in place first, so that there is actually that environment naturally in the same squad to be able to nurture that talent when a new junior data scientist joins. And I think that's probably the key thing, is just the structure itself. I think as well as that, I think in terms of the cross-functional work specifically, it can be a challenging environment to work that way, I think. But I guess I'd spin it the other way around, in that you're probably surrounded by fewer data scientists, and maybe it's harder for that aspect, but you do get to learn the engineering and deployment and product thinking a lot quicker, I think, than you would otherwise. So I guess it's a catch-22. There's some positive aspects. There are some things, if you don't get right, then the data science growth might not be as positive for a new joiner with limited experience. But I think certainly, having spoken to the junior data scientists in our team, I think they do love that aspect, especially working with engineering, and they're getting deployment experience and productionization experience from working in a cross-functional way, within their first year of leaving uni, which is going to make them not only, from a learning perspective, I think they love developing those skills, but it makes them very employable in the future as well, then of their careers further on.
That's another great point. I think we talked about it on previous panels and stuff, but that sort of data science skill set there is more to it than just writing Python, isn't there? And getting that rounded approach actually is a really good thing. So I'll come to you next, Tim, and then come to Katie after that. So yeah, in terms of more junior people in your team, Tim, how do you make sure they're progressing?
Yeah, I think Nick's made some good points there. For me, you've got to look at the individuals and think, well, what skills are they lacking, or where do they need to develop? And yeah, that depends on the person. For me, the kind of people who I've been hiring recently, so they come from quite an academic, quite a technical background. So yeah, there are things which I can teach them and they can learn about data science or about coding or all of these things. Yeah, we're all learning. But one of the key things that they can improve on is, seeing how data science fits in with the rest of the business, and either with the other technical teams or with the business teams. And so, yeah, putting them into that kind of cross-functional environment, I find is great learning for them, because they know what a data engineer is now. They know how the commercial people think and how they're going to use what they are producing. And so, yeah, that I find is great education for them.
Yeah, perfect. Tell them to stay away from any DBAs. They're always the scary ones. So Katie, I'd love to hear how you help people in your team progress.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's a lot around not presuming that I know how they want to progress. So like, I really like a nice open culture where we have a lot of chats about their development, and a culture, I guess, where people feel comfortable to say what they want. Like, I feel often maybe like, particularly with some less represented groups, find it hard to say, like, I think I want to be the next level above and these kind of things. So I think having this really regular open dialogue where it's completely fine to say, yeah, do you know what, I actually want to be this role over here, or I think I should be the level above, and not feel awkward or uncomfortable. I think that helps a lot. Like, whenever I have a conversation with my manager or the people team about the people in my team and what they want, I feel like I shouldn't have to ask them. I should know, like, this person wants this and this person wants this, they don't like doing this. Like, it should be just my common knowledge, the same as what they're working on. So yeah, lots of dialogue, lots of open, honest, just tell me what you want to do. I find that's really helped me.
Perfect. You do sound like a very good manager.
Oh, thanks.
Katie, so off you go back to being a senior IC. We'll wrap up with a couple of final questions. I'm a little bit conscious of time. So in terms of a couple of questions, just to finish up, just quickly from each of you, if we could take one learning point, the biggest learning point, either moving into or away from management, what is the biggest learning point for each of you? So I'll go with you first, Tim, then I'll come to Nick and Katie just at the end there again, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one. I think that the biggest learning point is it often just pulls strongly into focus, what do you actually want out of the job? I think when I was kind of first starting out, I think you can be a little bit more flexible about what you're doing, and you kind of get naturally moved around to lots of different roles. I think as you get more senior in any path, whether that's a senior IC or whether that's a manager, the kind of pressure of the job increases. So it is a lot more important to make sure that you are doing what you really enjoy doing. And so it is a very kind of personal thing to say, well, yeah, what bits do I really want to do? Which bits of being an IC do I want to hold on to strongly when I become a manager? Which bits do I want to let go?
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Tim. Come to you, Nick.
But yeah, I think the biggest learning, I think, for me was not to focus so much on the technical skills to lose track of the soft skills. I think there's always that tendency, is when you're starting out in a career, I think, to focus so much on, especially that's more measurable, I think, and quantifiable, the amount of technical knowledge you have, whether that's on the coding side or the maths and theoretical side. And that's why I think in my first few years, definitely being a data scientist, I didn't really fully appreciate the importance of the soft skills, I think. So I think investing in that sooner, I think, I wish I'd done. So influencing skills, for example, and communication is always mentioned as a big part of being a data scientist, which is definitely true. But I guess the influencing side as well, I think, is something that's really interesting. I think the psychology of people and and how to influence them. And there's loads of stuff online. I love them. Simon Lancaster is one of my favourites. The TED Talks that he gives, I think, are fantastic. And how to give a great speech, how to give a great talk, and body language and so on. So I think that's probably the one biggest lesson, is just investing in soft skills at an earlier age and getting that sorted.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's fantastic to flag, actually. And sometimes the best technical people aren't always the best managers, because it is a different skill set, isn't it? So it makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Nick. I'll come to you now, Katie, please.
So I think my biggest learning would be that I don't have to change my style to be like a manager. So like I'm quite like a casual person. I'm not like super polished. I'm very honest. And also a lot of stuff, particularly aimed at women, is like this like lean in culture and like, sit at the table, put your hand up. Like, that's not who I am. I'm never going to be like that. And that's okay. Like when I first became a manager, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to transform into this like perfect shiny person who like sits up and always has my hand up to speak. But that isn't going to happen. And that's okay. You can still be a manager and not be any of those things. And people will probably like you more because you'll be more authentic and they can relate to you and you will tell them the truth. So yeah, that for me is the biggest learning. Like, to be a manager, I have to change who I am and become this like shiny thing. I can just still be myself, and that's okay. And it will still be okay.
Amazing. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you very much. Very much. As I say, we'll wrap up. Actually, we'll go with this last question. We're talking, or the question is, have you found any good resources for people looking to move into management or out of management, and then go from there? I'll come to you first, Nick, actually, because you did mention there some TED Talks and stuff like that. So I guess you've perhaps got some ready, and then I'll come to Tim and Katie at the end again. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, so I think, the Simon Lancaster talk, definitely, I think there's several on there. I think they're brilliant on the speech and influencing side of things. I'd actually say, without wanting to sit on the fence too much, I think the best resources for me are always just talking to your peers and other people and gathering their experience rather than any one textbook that will give you all the answers. Just I think it's so interesting to get the human take on things as well, and what individuals did and what your peers did in certain situations and how they reacted, and it gives you time to digest that. So that's what I would say is just there's no single resource for that, but I think just understanding other peers' experience, I think, and from what they've done, I think is great.
Yeah, sounds real world experience as well, eh? Everyone's feeling the same pain, so come together and talk about it, which is good. Over to you, Tim, please.
Yeah, so one thing I found was, when you're a technical person, there's kind of a natural skepticism for management type learnings. So yeah, I was probably offered a lot more stuff, through the company and through learning things like this, which I was skeptical at first, and so avoided. Kind of wish I'd have done some of them now. So I think it is, take some of these opportunities, because there are a lot of these skills which are useful, even if you're not going to become a manager in the end. I'd also echo what Nick said about talking to your peers and looking around the company and seeing all the people who are managers at various different levels, and noticing that they are definitely not all the same. They all have their own different sorts of styles. They all have a different kind of mix of work that they do as well. So going out and talking to them, understanding how did they set up, their job to be like this, with some have a decent amount of technical stuff. How do you hold on to that? Some don't. Why not? What is it that you enjoy about it? So yeah, that's where I found the best advice.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tim. And then coming to Katie, just to wrap things up, please.
Yeah, so I agree in terms of like external resource. So I have found some TED Talks helpful in management, also like the TED blog, like there's often like ideas. It's not always related to management. Like, I guess this leans me on to my second point, which is like I found mostly resources helping me know more about myself the most helpful. So like I really like psychology type things. And it seems counterintuitive, but I actually think learning more about myself and like my boundaries and how I come across to other people, I think that actually has helped me most in terms of thinking about how I want to be a manager and my style and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it is helpful to talk to other people about their experiences, but I think actually really thinking deeply on like who you are and how you want to come across to people in these things, I have found that incredibly helpful.
It's a good take again. Thank you very much, Katie. I guess just to wrap things up, as I mentioned at the start, these are always my favourite type of events, and today's no different. It's been great hearing from all three of you. Really appreciate you giving up your time to come and support the Data Science Festival community. I know it's not just the time now either. It's preparing and putting together the slide deck and a bit of research and all that sort of stuff in advance. So really do appreciate it. And we've had a great number of questions come in, lots of positive comments in the chat, and people saying thank you as well, which is always nice to see. So thank you all once again. Definitely thanks to everyone at home as well for joining us and watching along. I will give November's festival one final plug. It would be rude not to, wouldn't it? I have to do that. So yeah, tickets are going live next week. We have got a newsletter going out, so keep your eye on that, and then we'll go from there. So I will wrap things up. I say thank you all very much one more time. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you all again soon. Thanks very much. Goodbye.